Welcome back to Z-Speed, and thanks for tuning back in. Today we're going to be replacing the rear struts on this 2006 Honda Accord. So this will cover the 03 to 07 model. So if you're interested in learning how to replace these, just stay tuned. Now you have a couple choices when it comes to replacing the struts on your vehicle, and one is to take a spring compressor, compress the spring and remove the strut and replace the strut only, or the second option is to replace the entire assembly, strut and spring, like I have right here. This is a KYB strut and spring assembly, and that makes it a little bit easier because you really don't have to deal with the spring compressor. But on the front of my vehicle here, I did replace the strut only, and I'll leave a link to that video below. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and remove part of the back seat to gain access to the shocks on the inside of the car. And we have to remove this lower pad down here, and there's a couple of little levers we're going to pull, one on each side of this seat, one right around this area, and then one over here on the passenger side, the same area right down here. And all we have to do is pull those and lift up. And we're going to use a little small flathead screwdriver to help us out here. So what you have to do is kind of lift up on the seat until you find that little tab. You can stick your flathead screwdriver in there and pull the tab out as you're lifting up on the seat, and it'll release. You can see I'm going to do it right here, and boom, we're loose right here. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing over on the driver's side, and you just have to kind of lift up on the seat a little bit. You'll see this little plastic tab I'm talking about. You can use your flathead screwdriver to help you pull it out, and then you can lift up, and we're done with that part. Okay, you can see the passenger side is ready to come right out, but not so much for the driver's side. There's one 10mm bolt hidden down in here, really close to the seatbelt area. It's really tucked away hard, and it's really hard for me to get a camera in there and light it up correctly, but right in there, I don't know if you can really make it out. You really can actually, but there's a 10mm bolt. So all you need is a little extension and a 10mm socket, and we should be able to unbolt that, and then the actual bottom of the seat will just slide right out. So I'm going to do that next. Okay, so I'm going to grab my extension with my 10mm socket, just kind of push down on the seat so you can get clear access to the bolt, and it should screw right out. And now we can remove this part of the seat and get to work on the little side panels. Okay, at this point you can see I've put the back seat down. We first have to remove a 10mm bolt on the bottom of this to release it, and I'm going to show you where it is real quick. Now my seat's still in at this point, but you know, we've already taken that out. But this is the 10mm bolt right here. That little 10mm bolt right there, that has to be released before we can slide this part of the panel straight up and out of the car. So let's get that out of there, and we can lift the whole panel up. Okay, now I've actually switched over to the passenger side, and I've released that 10mm bolt down below. I'm going to show you a little trick that I did with a pry bar because it's a little difficult to get it out by hand. So I'm going to show you an easier way to do it. And you can just take a pry bar like this or a very long flathead screwdriver, and we're going to get it right underneath the top up here, and I'm going to just kind of lift up on it. Bingo, right there, and it comes right out very easily. I'm going to show you really quickly where I stuck that pry bar right underneath that little clip right there, and I just stuck it right under there and lift it up. I'm just going to flip it around real quick and show you about where it is, right about here. You just lift up, and it makes it super easy to get that out. Now if you do it by hand, I actually had some difficulty and I almost broke it. So I would recommend you use a tool for that right there. Now we're going to remove this little part right here, this little black piece that goes across the top. And I thought I was going to need a pry bar on this as well, but nope, it pops right out. There's just two little clips, boom. So you can see it popped right out. It was really easy to get that out. So no problem with that. I'm going to show you exactly now where these two little clips are. There they are right there. Those two little white buttons, those are the only thing that's actually holding this piece on. So you can see once that panel is removed, we have clear access to these two 13mm bolts that hold the strut in place. This is the one in front and there's one directly back behind it here. There you go, see it right there? So all we have to do now is get our socket wrench in here and break these two loose. Very easy to do. I didn't have any problems at all with this part of it. So once we break these two loose, we want to actually leave a little bit of thread on the top of this nut here so we can control the shock. Once we release the bottom of it, we don't want them just to kind of drop down. We want to be able to control the shock so it doesn't hit anything. So once we get these broken loose and nuts almost off, we're going to go ahead and get this car up in the air. We can go ahead and get this rim out of the way, and now we have clear access to remove just two bolts. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, just two bolts. It's going to be much easier than we've just been through on the top portion of the strut. We just have a bolt on this side of the knuckle and one on the other side of the knuckle. So, and this one's pretty easy to get to. It's right behind this plastic line here. I'm going to try to get a little better angle. There we go. This bolt right here, and I believe that's a 14mm, but don't quote me on that one. We're going to go ahead and remove this little plastic line, then break that bolt free. So to make it a little bit easier on ourselves, we can remove this little clip that's holding the speed sensor in here. We don't have to remove the speed sensor itself, just remove the clip and we can get clear access to this bolt. You can see it broke free pretty easily here. And now I'm just going to spin it out with by hand. And now that we've got this out, we can go ahead onto the back side of the knuckle and actually remove the bolt that holds the lower half of the strut in. Okay, now we're on the back side of the knuckle. We're going to use a 17mm socket to break this bolt loose. And you can see I've used an extension here, and it just gets my ratchet away from the disc brake area and gives me a little more freedom to rotate this ratchet. So this one breaks free pretty easily. As you can see here, there's no real heavy rust or anything. So this one slides out pretty nice and smooth. Now that we've removed both of those bolts, you can see the only thing holding this bracket up is the end link assembly right there. Now you can see the bottom of the strut's free and it's moving around, so that's great. Now we're almost ready to take this thing out. You can see now we've got plenty of flex that we can push down on this hub and brake assembly, and that'll give us a lot more room to get this strut out. Now all we have to do is release those two bolts that we've loosened up top, and we can drop this hub and brake assembly, and that'll give us enough room to pull this old strut out so we can replace it with the new one. So now you can see I've got my right hand on the strut, and while I'm holding the strut up, I'm releasing those two nuts that are loosely tightened up top, and we just want to make sure that this strut doesn't drop down and damage the brake lines or the speed sensor or anything. And the good news was it really didn't even move that much. It only dropped down just a few inches and everything was nice and safe. So now we're ready to remove the strut from the vehicle. You can see I've got a nice long pry bar here, and I've found a good spot to secure it to this lower brake and hub assembly. And now we're going to use this pry bar to flex the whole brake and hub assembly while we grab hold of the strut and remove it from the vehicle here. So the best way to do it, I found, was to use your foot while you actually grab the strut with both hands. Trying to push down with one hand is just not enough. Your leg is much more powerful than your arm is, so and it's just a lot easier to manipulate the strut with both your hands. And you really don't want to scratch up your fender. If I could change anything, I would have put some painter's tape right around this area, and I did get a tiny little nick, but if you really press it down hard and take your time, you shouldn't really damage anything too badly. So once you get the strut free from the underneath the wheel well here, you can just take your time and slide the rest of the way out. And you can see I just had to turn it a little bit, and finally it just came right on out pretty easily. So now we've got the old strut assembly out and we're ready to install the new one. Now, before we place the strut assembly back in the vehicle, I have a little note for you here. This is the spring seat, and this is the end of the spring right here. We want to make sure that that's facing towards the rear of the vehicle. You do not want to place the strut assembly in this way. You want to make sure that it's rotated in this position before you place it back in the vehicle. So be very careful of that. So now we're ready to reinstall it, and basically we're just going to be doing it the exact same way we took it out. And you want to push down on this lower part of the suspension here with your pry bar or your crowbar, whatever you're using here, and you just want to carefully thread it back in right into this area right here. Now I'm going to adjust that little bracket that we loosened earlier with the end link attached and kind of move it out of the way a little bit so I can slide the end of this strut in. So it may take a little manipulation here, but just take your time and just push down with your leg and you can get it lined up in there. Once you get a good angle on it, then we're ready to go ahead and try to slide it down under your fender here. And that's the part we really want to be careful with. We do not want to scratch up our fender putting this thing back in. So you can see once I got the proper angle, it slid right into place. Now to get the tip of this past the fender, you can see I just scratched it a little bit. You really have to push down hard, and painter's tape right here on your fender would definitely benefit you and keep you from making the same mistake I did. Now that we've got the strut assembly inside the wheel well, I'm going to loosely attach it to the top of the vehicle in here. So what I'm going to do now is slide it into place, hold it up here with my right hand, and then with my left hand, I'm going to loosely attach the two nuts that came with the assembly up on top. And what that does now is it allows us to let it dangle freely here so we can line up the bottom of the strut with the bottom of the suspension. So once again, you'll be using the pry bar to push down on the suspension so you can line up the strut with this little bolt hole here. You can see I got it lined up finally. It wasn't too bad, and once I got the bolt in, it slid right on through this part of the knuckle and then through the strut, and then it kind of caught on the other side. So I haven't got it completely through here. And so at this point, I decided to use a ball peen hammer to tap it in lightly. You do not want to push it really hard. You can see I can't get the bolt to pass through here. So I'm gonna tap it, and what you wanna do is just lightly tap it. Do not hit it really hard. You do not wanna damage the threads on this bolt, or you'll have to replace the bolt. So if it doesn't tap in lightly, then push down on the suspension with your pry bar until you can get it to line up properly. So now that we have the bolt loosely tightened and the two nuts on top of the strut loosely tightened, it's time to torque everything to spec. We're gonna go ahead and start with the two nuts on top of the strut, and to get access to that one in the rear, that nut in the rear, just lift up on this plastic covering and you can get your torque wrench back in there. There's not a lot of room, as you can see here, but you can inchworm it until you get it tightened down to 37 foot-pounds. So that's what we're torquing these two nuts on top down to, is 37 foot-pounds. So just take your time and make sure you torque them to spec. So now we're back to the bottom of the strut where the strut actually attaches to the knuckle and the end link bracket right here. You can see I've loosely placed this bracket into place right here. And what we're going to do now is line this bracket up with the fixed nut on there and make sure it lines up with this bolt right here that we've placed through the knuckle and the strut. So you can see I'm just making sure I know exactly where it's at. It's right here. And now I'm going to place this part of the fixed nut right over that bolt, and I'm going to begin to start ratcheting the bolt into place. So what I want to do is to get it to catch into that fixed nut. So this may take a minute. Take your time. You definitely don't want to misalign it or strip it. So be very careful here, and you'll be able to tell once it actually catches. So you can see at this point, I've actually got the bolt to pass through the fixed nut and it's starting to clamp down. But you don't want to go too far with this bolt. You want to stop right around here once you get that much thread coming through so we can line up the other bolt here. And this may take a little bit of manipulation. Actually, it took me quite a few minutes to get it to line up right. You may have to wiggle it and adjust it. I even used the pry bar a little bit. That didn't really help much. But finally, yes, I was able to get it to line up correctly. And now I'm going to hand tighten that down so that we have both bolts loosely threaded. Now that we've got that completed, we can go ahead and get our torque wrench out, and we can go ahead and now torque this bolt that runs through the knuckle and through the strut down to 43 foot-pounds. Make sure you take your time and make sure you torque that to spec. And then once you get that all tightened down, you can switch back to the front of that bracket and you can go ahead and tighten that little bolt down that actually holds the in-link bracket in place. As you can see, I just clicked the speed sensor back into the bracket. No problems at all with that. It clicked right in. Now I'm going to torque down this 14mm bolt that holds the actual in-link bracket into the knuckle, and now we are all done with the job. You can sit back and congratulate yourself because you saved a ton of money by changing out your own strut assembly. So if this video helped you out, don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, you know what to do. Just keep on repairing.